Okay, we will go ahead and get started since it is 9 o'clock. So I just wanted to say good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our June Sweatland seminar series. My name is Lindsay Osborne. I am the Education and Training Lead and Program Manager at the Swetland Center for Environmental Health. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I just wanted to let everyone know that you should be muted right now. And if you have any questions or anything you would like to say, please go ahead and put that in the chat box. And you can also use the raise your hand feature that is under the reactions option if you would like to raise your hand and comment or ask a question. But in the meantime, if you would all like to share your name and the organization that you represent in the chat box, that would be great, and we welcome everybody with us this morning. So before we get started with our panelists, I just wanted to introduce our upcoming event at our center for next month. So we are having our 2021 Food Systems Change Fellows present at the Showcase of Opportunities. So we have 5 of our fellows that will be presenting on July 28th at 10:30 a.m. So the Showcase of Opportunities does feature our 2021 cohort of Food System Change Fellows and their ideas for community-driven food systems change. During the showcase, the fellows will pitch their ideas for community-driven food systems change, and reviewers will allocate funding for these impact-oriented visions. So after the showcase, the attendees will have the opportunity to join us for small group sponsor meetings with the fellows to learn more about how they can sponsor and support through time, talent, treasure, or teamwork. So I will be putting our event page for this in the chat box, and you'll be able to learn more about the event and register on this page. So segueing into our event today, we have 3 of the Swetland Center's Advisory Council members with us today to have a discussion about environmental health equity, both locally and statewide. So I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves, and this conversation will be moderated by our Center's Director, Dr. Darcy Freedman. So Nicole, if you would like to start us off, that would be great.
Unmute yourself first. I swear it's not my first Zoom call. Hi, I'm Nikki Byrd. I'm the curator of human health and evolutionary medicine at the Natural History Museum here in Cleveland. So my background is actually in biological anthropology, but I study diet and specifically how diet interacts with our built environment or our food system, right? So that's really that environmental health interaction for my personal work. Though I'm also at the Natural History Museum, and you may not realize how much environmental work and work on sustainability the museum actually does, right? So there's my specific work tying these issues into human health specifically, but we also do a lot of different work around preserving natural areas and improving sustainability efforts across Northeast Ohio, really, and we have a lot of over 9,000 acres of natural areas that we protect as well. So it's actually not just me, but a lot of the divisions at the museum that are really passionate about environmental health and connecting that to our human health. And what's a little different about our organization is we are an educational organization. So we're really trying to educate the public and get the public motivated to take part and feel powerful in these spaces to make change, right? So we believe that having knowledge lets you have power and really move the needle in terms of improving the health of humans in Cleveland and across Northeast Ohio, but also including the biodiversity and the natural sustainable environment as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thanks.
Our next panelist, Crystal.
Good morning. My name is Crystal MC Davis, Vice President of Policy and Strategic Engagement with the Alliance for the Great Lakes. We are a 51-year-old regional nonprofit focused on water issues, primarily Lake Erie. If we can go to the next slide. I'm not sure how this is. Okay, perfect. So these are my beautiful babies right here. So part of our drinking water work is really centered on meeting communities at their connection to the lake. And so we recognize that for many communities, Lake Erie is their recreation and their place of employment, and for others, it's their source of drinking water. And so our policy work is focused in 3 big buckets: aquatic invasive species, agriculture and water, and then our drinking water work, which is the newest body of water, but related to meeting communities where they are. This is our newest body of work because it is a outgrowth of what we heard from communities. We've heard that, hey, water affordability, aging water infrastructure, and lead service line replacement are priority issues for us, and we want you to take up those issues. And so they are a priority for our organization. And so we can go to the next one. This is the last one. And so we also recognize that social, racial, and economical justice are inseparable from environmental justice. We cannot achieve our vision of a Great Lakes enjoyed by all when systemic racism is allowed to permeate our society unchecked. And I always add this slide because it's never a time when it's not relevant to the conversation. And so as we sit today and explore the health implications of environmental issues, it's important to also think about the way that these issues connect with the racial justice fights, economic justice fights, education, and the other sectors that are all connected in so many ways. So thanks for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you so much, Crystal. We're so happy you're here with us. And Heather.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. My name is Heather Taylor-Miesle. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Environmental Council. The OEC is a 52-year-old organization. We do air, water, land, and democracy work. Really, the organization was largely a think tank until about 5 years ago, when we really relaunched with an objective to tie people to decision makers, to make sure folks understood how the environment impacted them and their communities, and then to make those issues relevant in a way that that people were really empowered to go out and really speak about the impacts that their community has. And so those decision makers might be, of course, in your city halls, those decision makers might be in the State House, and those decision makers might be in Congress. Congress is actually where I started. You can see on the little thing on there. I was there for about 9 years, first with Congressman Ted Strickland from Southern Ohio, and then with Congresswoman Hilda Solis from East Los Angeles, both dealing largely with environmental justice issues, but very differently. One, of course, in an Appalachian community, and one in a largely Latinx community, to really think through the real world implications of the environment. But OEC's journey was a little different than that. The organization had kind of largely been focused on the natural world, really until a few years ago, when we really started to think through everything through the people lens. In addition to Congress, I've also worked with tribal governments, really largely on cleanup of indigenous lands that were largely polluted by the Department of Defense. I was a negotiator between the two bodies at one point. Also worked for various Fortune 500 companies on how they can improve their sustainability, and then spent a large portion of my career with the Natural Resources Defense Council, one of the largest environmental organizations in the world. And so all before ending up back here in Ohio to do this amazing work with these amazing folks to really advance people's health in the environment. So thanks again for letting me be here, and just excited to spend some time with you all today.
Thanks so much.
Well, we'll go ahead and transition now into our sort of panel style discussion. And ideally, if we were in the room together, we would all be sitting, our panelists would be up in the front, but we'll do it Zoom style. I want to first acknowledge, though, that we have a great group of people here on the Zoom call, including folks from Case Western, as well as from a number of other universities across the United States. And so we'll definitely get to the point in the conversation today about, you know, how did you get to where you are? And even, you know, maybe just starting off, because I know a lot of the people in this call are interested. What is a tip that you have for anyone interested in beginning a career in the area of environmental health? We heard a little bit about your path, but do you have any, I want to make sure we do get this in, because I know even from our own interns, they're very curious about what does this path look like? So maybe starting with Crystal, what tip do you have for folks on the call today if they're just at the beginning stage of a career in environmental health?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I think that my tip is that, first of all, my trajectory into this place was not very common. My entire career has been in government relations and public affairs, having started at the Ohio State House and spent some time on Capitol Hill and then came back home to Ohio. And so my tip is to just stay authentic to what motivates you and what you're passionate about. And then find a way to connect that into the opportunities that you see. And so I've spent time working in the academia and working government relations for Kent State University. And I was able to execute my passion through advocating on behalf of TRIO programs. And that's something that made me feel like I had great purpose. And then in this role, it was a little different because I'm a self-proclaimed indoor girl. So I appreciate the outdoors from inside my house with a mimosa, looking out the window. And so, for me, where I find my passion in this work is really advocating on behalf of communities so that I can pass the mic to them and make sure that community voice is amplified in policy discussions. And so I think it's about finding places that really motivate you in all of the opportunities that you're presented with.
Awesome. Heather?
I think my best piece of advice for folks is to say yes, right? I wandered into this career, so I didn't even know that I was an environmental kind of justice person, right? So my dad's a pipeliner, which I always joke makes Thanksgiving super interesting for my family. And, you know, my first memories are of my parents actually arguing because my mom was the president of the PTA and my dad worked for the company town, right? And our playground was eye level with the tops of the smokestacks from Ashland Oil in Ashland, Kentucky. And kids were dying. Teachers not only carried whistles at recess, but asthma inhalers. And I remember as a kid thinking that that was ridiculous. They actually ended up closing down the school, busing us to a different location because it was so polluted in the region. But I remember thinking like, my trailer's still right there, right? Like I don't, you know, they didn't like move our houses. We still live there. They just like moved the kids somewhere during the day. And like, so even as like a first grader, I remember going like, what? I don't really quite get it. And the pull against being, you know, in poverty or in an impoverished community. I didn't know I was poor at the time, but like, you know, that pull against, you know, really we have to put food on our table and we need clean air. And like, so that kind of passion was there, but it wasn't actually awakened until I went to Congress and was working for Ted Strickland. And I had to write constituent mail, like a typical like entry level gal, right? Or guy, you know, you had to do kind of the worst jobs. And I realized writing those letters back to Ted's constituents on his behalf really gave me words to describe the injustice that I had experienced as a child. And it lit something in me. And I don't know what's going to light for you, but finding, kind of to Crystal's point, finding your joy, finding your authenticity, finding your passion, what you will walk through fire for, is what keeps you in these kind of spaces. And then try to figure out what the jobs are. I can't tell you how many people applied to a job for OEC who never actually understood that we had lobbyists, that we have lawyers, that we have communicators. We also have people who raise money and are passionate about talking about the environment and bringing resources in so that we have those advocates. We have people who do our accounting and HR directors, and those people who maybe are in their own space in this, but are no less important to our organization. And they find their own way to have that passion. But that passion is exactly what keeps you in this work, because it's hard. And if you don't have that passion, you're not going to last. So keep saying yes, and go out and find it.
Excellent. And Nikki.
I think mine is going to sound along the same vein, which I think sometimes as researchers, and my background is in research, you're kind of trying to keep your head down and in the data, right? So you don't personally connect. Like a lot of your training is on distancing, is what I would call it, right? It's trying to put a distance between you and whatever you're studying. And I know that one of my reasons for even coming to the Natural History Museum as an outlet was a desire to connect more with the people who make up the data that I'm like, how do we do this together, as opposed to working on a topic, but like passionately work with people on a topic and make others excited to do it with you. And so I think that's a lot of my tip would be, don't be afraid to connect to whatever you're passionate about, right? Like jump in and connect to it. That's not to say that you want to like bias all your data, but if you aren't connected to it, if you're not connected to it, you're not going to want to know what to do with it, right? Because I think, as Heather really pointed out well, it's that application part that has like the steepest curve. So going from collecting data, knowing what your data says, to like doing something with it, you won't get to the do something with it if you're not connected, right? You got to put yourself out there. You got to say yes to things. You got to join boards of people who can help you actually do something with your data. You gotta get out there and connect with your community so that you can like share something with people and not just like publish it and be like, well, I did my part. Someone should read that and figure it out. You have to do the translation. You can't expect someone else to do that work for you. So yeah, so make the connections early, and it'll make it easier for you after you know what you want to say. Like you got to connect before you know what you want to say.
Awesome. And so, as I was listening to both your introductions and this little tip, what I'm hearing, and a lot of people, when we say environmental health, they're like, what is environmental health? And when we talk about environmental health, we're talking about the built environment. We're talking about grocery stores. We're talking about the physical environment. What are the contaminants or the toxins in the air and the water? We're talking about the social environment, whether it's how we're treated because of our race or because of our income, or even things like social connectivity. And then lastly, we're talking about the natural environment. And sometimes that's what we think about the most when we say environment, the parks and green space. And I'm outside now, and you might hear some birds. And so when in the Swetland Center, we focus on all 4 of those domains of the environment. And the other thing that I heard, which I think is super exciting, is I heard that knowledge is power when we talk about environmental health. So we do need to learn some stuff. But I also heard people are power, right? And we got to bring other people with us, along the way. And I think it's particularly important for the trainees to hear today, but also those of us working long in the field, is that passion is power. And sometimes we're encouraged to, as you said, Nikki, sort of separate ourselves from the cause, but actually when we're able to bring ourselves into that. And then lastly, around, water is power. And food is power, and parks are power. And when we have those, they really create energy for a lot of good things. And so I want to turn it back over to Crystal. Of course, many of us were really excited to turn on NPR this week and hear Cleveland in the national spotlight for our climate action plans because of their focus on equity. Some are calling our plan a model for how future climate action should be implemented at the national scale. Crystal, can you touch upon current structural issues and give some examples of how local environmental initiatives are centering around equity and justice?
Sure. I think that there's an increasing focus, of course, on equity and justice, and that's welcomed. I've been saying, I think I've had 15 presentations in the last 2 months. We started charting how many I've had. And I've been saying to people, like, with this new focus on equity, it's not a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing. And for those folks, I say, welcome to the movement. Happy to have you. Join us. We're saying a lot of the things that people have been screaming from the rooftops and from their front porches, honestly, for years. And so I think with some of the structural issues, it's just bureaucracy in a lot of situations. One of the growing conversations I'm hearing from community members is there's an increased focus on the federal dollars that are coming down to states and local governments, which is great, right? But not having community voice be a part of those conversations could be detrimental, because community members are having conversations about, well, are there local governments or agencies really set up to receive these funds? Is there going to be a disproportionate burden on community organizations because they are the real neighborhood navigators? And so when we have to get folks to sign up for these great new programs, who has the credibility to go into the neighborhood and get Miss Johnson to sign up? It's not going to be an agency official knocking on their door, sending them a piece of literature in the mail. It's going to be that local community advocate, that organization that's been around for 1 million years. And so are they going to be compensated for the outreach and engagement that they're going to have to do, the increased outreach and engagement that's going to have to happen? And so those are some of the conversations that need to happen. Do we have equitable systems in place to receive community feedback? Is it just that they have to read some lengthy document and then submit comments the way we submit comments when we, as a larger environmental organization, we submit comments to an agency? Or will there be opportunities to send emails, to send a video, or to talk before council or whoever? And so those are some of the issues that I'm hearing as far as potential challenges to addressing equity and making sure that community voice is integrated into these discussions.
Excellent. And do you know, are there any resources available for communities to sort of get at some of the challenges that you mentioned to integrate community voice into the process?
Yeah, so there are some things. I know that the Alliance for the Great Lakes and the Ohio Environmental Council and about a dozen other local community organizations are working together right now on a resident engagement toolkit that's coming out very soon. And so we have the comprehensive Cleveland Comprehensive Policy Platform that lays out a number of the priority environmental issues here in Cleveland. And then what we've taken it a step further to say, we need to have this resident engagement tool that then breaks down those issues even further and rids it of the insider jargon so that community can understand it, and then we can connect them to opportunities to amplify voice. We know that the Alliance is a 501c3 compliant organization, and insert disclaimer here, but we know that as the local elections gear up, we need environmental justice and the environmental priorities of the community to be at the forefront. And so we're equipping community members with the questions that should be, some of the question starters that should be asked at some of the community forums and candidates forums, so that we can make sure that we're holding elected officials accountable to these issues.
Awesome. And when can we expect to be able to get our hands on this resident engagement toolkit, and where should we go to find it when it's available?
I think you should be able to go to the Alliance for the Great Lakes website for sure. I know it'll be on greatlakes.org and probably on OEC's as well. We usually link it up that way. And so it'll probably be on both of our websites. And I know that you have access to I think it's in the chat already, the policy platform, but the resident engagement toolkit will be, I think, ready. I do not want to say the date because I think it's by the end of the week. And so I'm just gonna say next week because I just am always scared.
Awesome.
Sure,
Well,
it's in my email, Crystal. So I think I'm the holdup on, at least on our side.
Okay.
But yes, it'll be there hopefully by the end of the week, and you guys can see the platform in there. And we hope that we'll have some events this summer with some of those candidates for education. If you guys don't mind, there's one thing I just want to add. Crystal was right on that, and she's doing like amazing work up there on not just engaging the grassroots organizations, but actual people, right? There's a difference, right? Our organization really has a history more of like working to organization to organization. There's a difference to working in the community to empower, you know, your neighbor. And I think that the one thing that I'm learning just watching the Cleveland ecosystem of activists is that this goes well beyond organization to organization, and it really is a model. And Crystal's one of the folks on the ground who's been leading that so beautifully. The other thing I just want to say is don't be intimidated. We've been hearing here recently. So right now in the State House, there's a budget bill. It is a catastrophe. I could talk to you about it for 25 minutes about the 100 different reasons why this is not great. Just if you're a person, like even if you hate the environment, it's a really bad bill. And one of the things that we've been hearing from activists lately, and people who don't even call them activists, right? Just people who care about the environment, is that they feel intimidated to go and speak out, right? And one thing I just want to make sure that we encourage people in every space is you don't have to be an expert to ask for basic human decency, right? You know, you don't have to, sometimes legislators or decision makers at all levels of government, I don't care what their political party is, will say, well, you don't know enough about this to understand. I think that collectively we all understand, you know, basic human decency, right? Values like, let's make sure people are healthy. Let's make sure that folks have a chance to succeed. And I do think that we're seeing people get tripped up on the details. Don't get tripped up on the details. That's not your job. Your job, like if this is something that you're passionate about, is to raise these issues and let them know that you're watching and you expect them to act well. And so the details are really important. These resources are there, but don't let that keep you from weighing in, whether that is, you know, at a company that you work at, or with a legislator, or with, you know, someone running for office. All of that is really important.
Awesome. Well, I think I want to go ahead and transition over to Nikki. And, you know, in your role working within the museum, you mentioned that that education is a key component. So we know, however, that there's this huge gap between knowing and doing. So how do you feel we can translate knowledge and interest into action when it comes to environmental health equity?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 points, and Heather set me up perfectly again. So I got a double perfect setup. And that is one of the things really we work on a lot, is that often in how our educational system works, people are trained to keep their mouth shut unless they are sure they are going to get the answer 100% correct, because they're afraid that they'll be wrong. And so it like paralyzes people into this state of like, I'm not perfect, I can't comment. And like, we do a lot of work in drawing people out that science and understanding is actually a process of asking questions, right? So helping people be part of asking the right questions and asking the right people the right questions, which is, I think, kind of totally in line with what Heather is saying, right? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to go, I know exactly the answer I want from you, but I want you to be able to answer this question. And if you can't answer the question, when you're asking your policymakers or whoever you're asking questions of, that's the flag, and to understand how to interpret that sort of data. So that's one thing we do a lot of, is freeing people from this kind of old-fashioned, you have to be perfect form of education, right? We do informal education at the museum. It's about fun. It's about finding the thing that makes you feel excited and passionate to learn about. Like, everyone wants to learn about something. Everyone will be a kid about some subject. You got to find the subject that's going to make them like dive in. And so we spend a lot of work on that, right? How can we make grandparents and children have the same response to learning things? And if you really learn things and you learn that process, you're going to want to share it, right? And I think that gets into the how do you get to action. When you are sharing knowledge about what you learned about the environment, what you're learning about how we connect to it, how important both like our city of Cleveland is, but also the wider Northeast Ohio, right? We grow food here. We have to get our food from somewhere. How do these systems connect? When you start putting that together and are just passionate about the knowledge you have, so you start sharing it, it'll start winding people up and spiraling this conversation. And once you start talking to your neighbor about it, when I think this gets into what Crystal's work gets into, right? How you go from grassroots organizations to people, is when you start talking to your neighbor, you get more comfortable. And now you know that you and your neighbor across the street and the people that your kids go to school with all care about this. You're gonna feel, oh, I can ask more questions about this. I know that I'm not alone, right? We all have these questions. We all want to do this. And so I think that it's a building process. And I think the hard part for us as organizers and researchers is we can't actually do the action part, right? We can't do it. You have to trust that you're going to like talk to people and get them activated, and then they will do it. You cannot do it for them. You cannot make them do an action, and you can't make them do the action you want. They're going to do something different than what you planned, and you got to give that up. I think that's the hardest part, both as educators and as people working in this space towards what we see are good alternatives. They may not do what you want, and that I think is the hardest point from an educator standpoint. You got to give out the knowledge. You got to make people feel like they can talk about it and do it. Get them asking questions, and then acknowledge that it might be a totally different action than you wanted, but there will be action. It just might not be the action you planned for.
So I'm hearing some trusting in the process there. And there was a comment in the chat about, you know, that we also, in some ways, this idea of helping people generate questions and use their own mind to interpret, and, you know, building on different sort of resources isn't necessarily, you know, the underlying motivation in a lot of educational programs right now, where you feel like you have to get the grade. It doesn't matter what I learn, as long as I get an A. You know, and so how do we integrate that back into the training opportunities that we have, that we reward the process? And I can say, even within the Swetland Center, with our Food Systems Change Fellowship, it's all, we talk with the fellows, it's all about the process. Like, there is not a thing we want you to develop. And it's taken a long time to like, okay, I get it. It's about the process. It's about an evolution, adapting, evolving. So I want to kind of transition over into this idea. We've been talking about action. We've been talking about knowledge. So Heather, we've got a great group of people here today. We don't want to miss this opportunity to link the knowledge people are getting with action. Can you discuss a few action steps attendees of the seminar can take to address environmental health issues, you know, at various levels, whether it's locally or statewide?
Sure, and I would love for the other panelists to weigh in on this too, because I know that they've got great ideas and are doing great work on this as well. You know, I think that the first thing is going to the point of not like necessarily always having the questions, right? Being able to just like kind of talk things out and ask yourself critically about connections. One of the things that I often do, especially with advocacy, is I have a little brother, and he is like an average Joe, right? And I'll catch up with him and I'll try to explain to him an issue. Right. And so like trying to figure out how to explain it to somebody who's not in this work. We use so many acronyms. We understand like PFAS right now is a big issue. There's like a big drinking water issue. There's going to be some hearings on Capitol Hill this week, all kinds of really good things going on related to certain kinds of chemicals in your water. My brother doesn't know what PFAS is. He does not care, right? He wants his water to be clean. And so understanding how to talk to normal people is going to be the very most important thing that you can do. Because sometimes the decision maker that is most important is not going to be the one who's necessarily casting the vote. It's going to be the people who surround you, because usually things don't happen unless there's a community swell of support. And so number one, you know, being able to translate these topics is going to be really super important for all of you. Like I challenge you to find your person who will let you talk about it. Like my brother's really nice about it. Like he'll allow me to talk about these adorable things, and he'll be like, oh, Heather, like I have no idea. And you know, like even climate change for him, right? This is something I think about all the time. He's like, I'm just like a guy. How am I gonna be a part of the solution with climate change? So, you know, really understanding that connectivity is going to be really quite important. And then start to talk about it, start to share about it on social media, start to talk about it whenever you're re-entering the world after this time away from your community. And you don't have to be like Debbie Downer, right? But helping people understand that there's some issues going on in the community and there's ways to get involved. As far as the real connectivity, right? As far as that next step, there's a couple of things that you can do. First, figure out the organizations that you trust and follow them on social media. For us, you know, our website is fine, but if you want to get up-to-date information about what's going on in the State House or Congress, or even certain city halls regarding your environmental health and your community's environmental health, you know, you can find that information. And then there's always ways that you can weigh in, whether that's showing up. I'm really excited about this residential toolkit, right? Because we can hold all kinds of candidate forums. OEC also has a sister organization, OEC Action Fund. So we do participate in politics. And we do plan to be in the Cleveland mayor's race especially, but probably some of the city council races as well. And so we'll participate there, but like we've got a political organization. That's not going to mean nearly as much to, you know, the Sandra Williams of the world, the Justin Bibbs of the world, the Dennis Kuciniches of the world, like any of those kind of guys out there that are running, as hearing from normal folks. And so whenever they host their own event and somebody walks up and says, hey, I need you to take this seriously, that's going to probably mean more than all the money that I'm going to spend in this election campaign. And so realizing your own voice, encouraging that, helping people see their connection, and then taking the step to go and speak up are really the basics. Now I can go into like your 201, your 301, your 401, your grad school level of advocacy, but it all starts with that. And I can't tell you how important it is for every point of progress that we have ever made. And frankly, every battle we've ever lost has often been, you know, with the exception of HB6, and I could also talk to you about that all day. But with the exception of that one, almost every battle we've ever lost is because we didn't actually bring the people effectively to the topic.
And let me just build a little bit more on that in terms of thinking about action, and maybe some of our other panelists can join in. There are the issues, you know, when we talked about environment, there are things that we know are clearly squarely in environment: climate change, water health, food security. And then there are these other things like redistricting and that are affecting environmental health. And would any of the panelists be willing to chat a little bit about how these broader issues, such as redistricting, which is going on right now in Ohio, are central to the environmental health table?
Do you want me to start? I like just redistricting is one of our main jams, I would say. And we are on the Citizen Commission on this. So redistricting is like a weird arcane process. Usually when you get down into process, you lose people. So I'll try to keep it like pretty top level. But the basic here is that if government doesn't work, it is really hard to protect people as a collective, right? And right now, I don't know if you all have noticed, but government is a little crazy cakes right now. And one of the reasons is because there are basically politicians have been put in charge of drawing their own districts. So essentially they get to pick their voters instead of their voters picking them. What that means is that the only race that typically matters is their primary. And typically primary voters are a little bit more extreme. They tend to be, I am always a Democrat or I am always a Republican. And so the person who is more extreme typically comes out of a primary. What that means is that when it's time to actually govern, the two sides are so extreme, they often won't even talk to each other. And so you just have this like clash of the titans every single daggone day. And you're like, hey guys, I'm over here. I just would like clean water. You know, can you all work this out? I just need some clean water. This is not hard. And you know, if you could make it affordable, that would be even better, because what good is clean water if I can't afford it? And, but they're still over here arguing. So we've been working for several years to really try to figure out a way to bring fairness to how these lines are drawn. We're part of two different coalitions. One's called the Fair Districts Coalition. The other one's called the Equal Districts Coalition. They're essentially the same, asking for fairness in these lines so that communities can be kept together. The theory is that if a community is kept together, then a member will have to listen to those constituents, and then they'll have to pay attention to, you know, the creek that provides your drinking water, or the air quality basin, or, you know, whether they're trying to keep clean energy out, or whether they're cleaning up a coal plant, you know, like any of those types of things. The idea is that they'll have to listen to you instead of their donors, which is really what's happening right now. So we want them to have to talk to each other. We want them to have to pay attention to you. And that's what we're going to be fighting for. We're going to see the census is a little late because of the pandemic. And so we're supposed to get our numbers back in early August to really understand how many people and what the distribution needs to be. And then we go into a map drawing process. It's not perfect, guys. We've tried our hardest to get as fair of a system as absolutely possible, but you know, essentially the fox is still guarding the hen house and the politicians are still in charge. What is really important for all of us is to be telling them that we demand that they are fair. And so showing up. So we were able to negotiate that every single person in Ohio can submit their own map. And we've got some map drawing tools on our website at oec.org. It's the OEC, excuse me, on .org. And there are also resources at Equal Districts and Fair Districts on their website for you to very easily draw your own map. And you can do really cool things like, you know what your community is more than just MapQuest, right? You know that that church is really part of your community. You know that that school is really part of your community. And you can draw it, you can submit it. Best part, they actually have to tell you why they didn't take your map. And that is going to be really important as they draw those final maps, because they have to tell every citizen why their map basically is better. And so we're going to stay on this. We encourage all of you guys to submit your maps. And hopefully we'll be able to get some fairness. So we're drawing most of September. It's August, September is really when this process is going to happen. And we think that there's a good chance they're still going to ignore everybody, just because that tends to be what's happening right now in our politics. So we are still designing other ballot solutions. We're still designing legal solutions to take them to court. And we are keeping their feet to the fire. So I hope you'll join us in this. This is probably, it's funny because, you know, we deal with all kinds of really important environmental issues every day. I would, if you asked me what's the most important environmental vote in the next year, redistricting is it for me. And so I'll find the link here in just a second for you, Rachel. But yes, so
do you know, Heather, how long is the deadline in terms of submitting maps?
So you'll be able to submit maps, I think, until the end of September. I can find the exact deadline. We were able to get into the Constitution specific dates, but when the census data got thrown off, it's been a little bit of a crazy show here. So
great. Well, as at the Swetland Center, we'll definitely look into maybe helping people, you know, if they're interested in working on those maps. That's a great idea. So I want to open it up now to the participants of the seminar. I have more questions, but I wanted to make sure you all have a chance to ask your question. So if you just want to unmute, feel free to do that and ask your question. Anybody have a question?
If people are thinking, can I just say one thing I wanted to say in response to what Heather was saying that I think that nobody brought up but is important? And we didn't talk about how we conceptualize what health and medicine is. And that's actually one of the stumbling blocks to this, I think. I think we tend to be very individualistic in our terms of how we think of health, but that's not really how it works. And I think that's one of the important things about including environment is it moves you just from like my personal, do I have a cold or not, into a more public health realm and knowing that your individual health connects to public health. Like those are not separate. We tend to talk about them like they're over here. They're not, they're connected. I just wanted to say that because I think we forgot to mention that.
Great. Any questions from the audience? Yes, and I think Brandy's comment about the last year. And so that is something I did want to ask the panelists. You know, we know COVID-19 laid bare underlying racial inequities. We know people living in crowded housing and working jobs requiring in-person contact were disproportionately burdened by COVID-19. What are some of the key lessons learned about environmental health unveiled during the pandemic? And how do we mobilize these insights into community systems change to advance environmental health equity for Black and Brown communities? Would one of the panelists like to start off with that?
Happy to start. Well, I'll say COVID was not the great equalizer. It just wasn't. I kind of heard that at the beginning of the pandemic. So people were like, oh my gosh, now we all are stuck in the house. I'm like, yeah, and it's still not the same. And it really exacerbated existing injustices. I think it's important to keep saying that. We were fighting for water shutoffs, against water shutoffs prior to the pandemic. We kicked it into overdrive because of the pandemic, because there were more people that were stuck at home and the CDC is saying, wash your hands, wash your mask now. And when you don't have water, that presents a challenge. When you have kids that are homeschooling at home all day long, you need water in the house. And so we went to try to work at the state levels to try to get moratoriums on water shutoffs. And that was marginally successful because they put in some moratoriums for a short period of time. But then we were challenged and had to go from city to city across the entire region because of the levels of bureaucracy in place, and states saying, hey, I really just don't have the jurisdiction to do this long term. And so we're going city by city to try to get them to stop water shutoffs in the midst of a pandemic. And so I think that is something that was highlighted for our organization. Personally, I'll speak as a woman of color in this movement. There have been a lot of conversations about the physical health implications that COVID has highlighted. You know, if you already had asthma and now COVID hit, this is, you know, a whole different type of situation. But I am so much more in tune to the emotional toll that it's had on our communities. I have colleagues that have had upwards of 30 family members die of COVID, and they cannot sit on a Zoom and look at friends and colleagues without tears welling up in their eyes. And their emotional health and fatigue is depleted. It's bad. It's a bad situation. And when you're the only person of color in a lot of these rooms and everybody's focusing on equity, and so they are asking you questions about equity and racism and racial justice, and you have to have a spirit of resilience and education and poise, it weighs on you. There is a disproportionate labor that I and my colleagues are enduring right now that is affecting me and a lot of my colleagues in a way that I cannot fully articulate. And so I think that we've talked a lot about this physical you know, toll that it's taken on our communities and seeing family members die. And you know, it almost rolls off the tongue. Disproportionate impact to communities of color, like we just say it like that. But that's 30 funerals she didn't get to go to. That's not getting closure to so many different relationships. That's showing up to a Zoom and putting your camera on and smiling when you want to cry and go under your desk. And so I just want to highlight that, because then when we talk about it, you sound like angry Black woman. Because then it's like, oh, you're so angry. It's like, yeah, I am. I'm seeing Black men get killed on TV all day. And then my community is dealing with the health implications of COVID. And I'm fighting on the front lines of people not having water, but you want me to smile when I show up on the Zoom. And so in terms of action items, I just implore folks to have grace with your colleagues. Please just show them a level of grace, everybody. It's not just your community, your colleagues of color. Women, men, everybody, non-binary, show everybody a level of grace, because we don't know what they're dealing with right now.
I'm not sure if Darcy got dropped from the call or not, but I just wanted to also echo a comment from Rachel in the chat box. I wanted to thank you, Crystal, for your vulnerability and honesty in your response for that. I think we, you know, just echoing what Rachel said, we can all be more conscious and aware of these extra stresses that may not be apparent to us in our Black and Brown communities. So yes, I wanted to thank you for that. There's Darcy. Darcy, I don't know if you had any more questions. I know that we are coming up on about 7 minutes left, and I did, Nicole, if you had a comment that you wanted to make or anything else to add, or if there are any other questions from any of the audience members, we do have a few minutes left.
I was just going to say one thing that I think is broadly, that I think speaks to Crystal's point too, is that we all have to be kinder to each other. And I know that sounds really like, okay, but I think sometimes, particularly in Zooms and things like that, you can forget that the people you're talking to are people. And I think we would all get a lot farther, no matter what your priorities or goals are, if we just like reached out to people knowing they're a person and think, you know what, we probably have more things in common than we don't. We all have concerns and families and things happening, and try to personalize. And I think that goes to what we tell people about things like climate change and Action 2. There was a real doom and gloom. People don't respond to that. People respond to, we're in this together and we can move forward. And I think part of doing that is remembering that everyone you're talking to is a person. and try to connect to the person, and then you can connect on the issues, and then you can move forward. So I just wanted to say that's on all of us to do. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that. Well, we are closing in on 5 minutes. So I did want to put, I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I wanted to thank our panelists so much for joining us today for such an insightful conversation. I know I learned quite a bit about what's going on currently, and I wanted to share our panelists' contact information if you wanted to find them on social media. We have everyone's Twitter accounts, as well as the website of their organization and their email addresses. So this recording of the seminar will also be posted on our Swetland Center events page. So you will be able to access this again if you want to look at these slides in here for contact information, but I just wanted to share this with everybody in case anybody wanted their contact information. So here's Nicole's, we have Crystal's, and we have Heather's. And like I said, this will be uploaded to our website probably by the end of the day today. So definitely, you can visit our website to get this contact information if you weren't able to take it down now. But I also wanted to quickly plug our Swetland Center's book club. So our center has a book club called the Swetland Readers, and I'm going to drop the link to our page right now in the chat box if anyone is interested. But the book that we're currently reading is called Silent Spring. It's actually very important to our center. So it's written by Rachel Carson and it was published in 1962. And this book was really important to David and Marianne Sweatland. They were really passionate about, educating people and making sure that people were aware of these unintended health consequences of, things like chemical and agricultural and industrial products in our environment. So we are reading Silent Spring as part of our summer book club. The link that I just posted in here has more information about the book as well as the actual PDF of the book. And it has the dates of our public sessions. So the first one is this Friday. We will be going over the first half of the book, but feel free to join us. Even if you just want to listen to the conversation, we'd be more than happy to have you. Or if you want to finish the book by Friday, July 23rd, you can join us for our second public session. There is a registration link on this webpage that I just put in the chat. So definitely feel free to register, even if you just want to join the conversation and listen. If you haven't finished the book, we'd be more than happy to have you. And it will be facilitated by our center's summer interns. So we're really looking forward to everybody who's joining us.
Well, I just want to say I apologize for falling off the radar for a moment. And I really appreciated, in particular, Crystal, your feedback about the impact of COVID on particularly in Black and Brown communities, and the tension to body, mind, and spirit. And in fact, in the work of our food systems modeling project within the center, we have been pushed by our community partners, again, back to those listening to the people on the ground, that we need to be widening our understanding of health beyond body. We often talk about problems of the body, but really moving into body, mind, and spirit. And so to be honest with you, as a researcher, I sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable in the spirit, and mind maybe less so spirit. And so it's been a great opportunity to push beyond what we're comfortable with and to recognize, and many of our community partners will say at the end of the day, and many of us know this in our lives, if we are not healthy in spirit, it doesn't matter if our body is healthy, right? And so, it's a growth space within our center, but we are excited to see how that can be become a focus area for us. So thank you for that. And thank you all of our panelists today are members of the Advisory Council of the Swetland Center. The work that we do is only because we have amazing advisors around us, amazing partners. And so thank you so much for your dedication to your time. And thank you for everybody for joining today. We wish you the best of luck. And I can promise you, if you email any of these women, I guarantee they would love to talk to you and share more of their story and get you, pointed on a path. Sometimes that's all it takes is one dot in the connect the dots that takes you into a zillion other directions. So please feel free to reach out to the speakers from today. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.